Hi, I was asked about Jewish attitudes to music. This is a huge subject, but let me begin with the beginning. First of all, as you might be aware, in the temple in Jerusalem, there was actually Levites who would sing every part of the temple service. During the time there was a temple in Jerusalem, over 800 years, and of course during the 400 years before then, in which we had the portable temple known as the tabernacle or the Mishkan, there was music. Levites, the Levium, the tribe of Levi, would sing, and there would also be Levites who would play musical instruments. So it was an integral part of the service in the Jewish temple. An integral part of the service of the sacrifices and everything else was always accompanied by song, always accompanied by music. One of the reasons for this, on a very simple level, was mood. That, for example, if it was a sin offering, then there'd be sad music. And then at the point where the offering was accepted, where the person had been atoned for and he had repented, then it would segue into happy music, like a Vivaldi going from winter to spring type of idea. So that would be one idea, to set the mood, and that's an important part of what music does. In addition, we know from the book of Samuel and the book of Kings that prophets, number of the prophets were only able to achieve prophecy when they would hear music. Now the Talmud says the reason for that is because you can only achieve prophecy, you can only really ultimately connect to God when you are in a situation of a mood of simcha shel mitzvah, of joy, and an appropriate joy and happiness. And the music that brings that happiness and that joy to a person, and hence in a sense opens his or her mind to the possibility of prophecy. There are obviously other things required for prophecy, intellectual, moral, ethical requirements, but in addition to all that, the person has to have what's called simcha shel mitzvah, the joy of a mitzvah, an appropriate joy, and that was accomplished by music. A third idea behind music, and this is found in the words of a student of the Gaon of Vilna, he says that every area of life has its own language and its own form of communication. Science, nature communicates through mathematics, algorithms and formulae, etc. Intellect communicates through speech. He said the soul communicates through music. I don't totally understand what that means, but apparently he says a lot of the secrets of the soul can be found in music. In fact, the Gaon of Vilna went on to say that many of the secrets of Kabbalah, of mysticism, of an understanding of the deeper levels of the relationship between the physical and the spiritual can be found in a person who really understands music on the deepest possible level. So the Gaon of Vilna seems to say that music is a method of communicating spirituality. Obviously depends on the music, but one of the components of music is that idea, and some explain because what music does, it's the notes that you remember, it's the notes that you're experiencing, and it's the notes that you anticipate. So it's a combination of the past, the present, and the future. There's a certain aspect of music also which unifies people. When people sing together, when in synagogue during our prayers, there are many parts of those prayers in which we sing together. When we sing together, all the different voices blend into one, and there's a certain level of unity which is accomplished by that communal singing. One of the traditional Jewish modes of music is called chazanut. Chazanut is where the person who leads the prayers, the chazan, in English the cantor, uses his voice as a very beautiful instrument and uses it to give different, or to express the emotion of the specific prayer that is being said at that time. So because as Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin says in his commentary on the Torah is called a song or a poem. He says prose doesn't convey emotion well. It's much better for something which is intellectual. But he says if you want to convey emotion, poetry, music conveys the emotion as well. And so therefore what the Chazan does is he opens up a world of emotion and spirituality in the prayers and in the words of these prayers. It is interesting, Reb Nachman of Breslov, very great Hasidic master, once commented the word chazan, cantor in Hebrew, actually is related to the word chazon. Chazon means a vision, because what a good cantor, a good chazan does is he gives you a vision of what the prayers are about from an emotional perspective, from a spiritual perspective, which the music, the traditional music, is supposed to bring out of those words. And indeed, we have traditions of various forms of chazanut that date back over 1,000 years, some possibly even older than that, and which may have its origins in the tunes of the Levites in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. Contemporary Jewish music, and I mean by contemporary past 100, 200 years, much of it was actually came from the music of the people around us. The Jews of Morocco would take traditional Arabic music and set it to the tunes of Zmirot, the Sabbath prayers. The Jews of Al-Andalus of Spain would use the music of their time and place, and they would use it for Jewish songs and modified, etc. The Hasidim would often take folk songs in Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, etc., and use those. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was a part of what the Kabbalists call taking the sparks of godliness that exist in different times, places, and cultures and elevating them by incorporating them in a very beautiful way into the Jewish liturgy and into Jewish celebrations. So what is the original Jewish music? We don't really know. I have a feeling that it's probably closer to classical music than it is to rap, but that's my personal feeling. There is some historical evidence for that as well, and that's a little bit of an intro to what Jewish music is about. Obviously a much greater subject. And I should point out one more thing. When we read the Torah in the synagogue, the Torah is not read, it's actually sung. There are special notes in the Torah, which we have, the actual notes themselves were the symbols of those notes were created much later in history, but the actual notes themselves, there is a strong belief that goes back to the oral tradition of Sinai and is the way in which the Torah gives punctuation and emotion and a different dimension to the words of Torah. So when you hear the Torah in synagogue, listen carefully, because the notes with which it's read convey punctuation, emotion, and many dimensions of meaning, which you don't necessarily get if it's just read. So hence, also, as part of Jewish music, is this other dimension of understanding and commentary on the Torah itself. Thanks for watching, and if you have questions, I will try to address them if you want to put them in the dialogue box underneath this video, and perhaps at a future time we can answer them in another video.